It was a warm, quiet evening, and I was sitting outside my small workshop, enjoying the cool breeze after a long day of work. I had just finished making a stool for a customer, and the wood shavings still clung to my shirt. My workshop, made of wooden planks and a tin roof, stood proudly at the edge of our compound. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and I had built it with my own hands. As I relaxed, a strange smell drifted in the air, burning. At first, I thought someone nearby was burning trash. It's common in the village to do that in the evening. But the smell grew stronger. My stomach tightened with worry, and I stood up to look around. That's when I saw it, thick black smoke rising from my workshop. My heart jumped. No. No, no, no. I shouted, running toward the flames. By the time I got there, the fire had already spread, licking at the wooden walls like a hungry beast. I grabbed the bucket and ran to the water drum, but no matter how much water I threw, the fire didn't stop. Neighbors rushed to help, but the flames were too fast. By the time it was over, the workshop I had spent years building was nothing but ashes. I stood there, staring at the ruins. My tools, my hammer, saw, chisel, and the small generator I saved up for months to buy were all gone. The smell of burnt wood filled the air, and the heat of the ashes stung my face. I felt like my chest had a hole in it. How would I start again? How would I tell my customers their work wouldn't be done? That night, I sat outside my house, staring at the remains of my workshop. The stars above seemed so far away, and the world felt heavy. My workshop wasn't just a place where I worked, it was my dream. I had started with just a hammer and a borrowed saw, making little things like stools and repairing broken furniture. Slowly, I saved money and bought better tools. I had big plans for it. But now, all of that was gone. Everything I worked for had disappeared in one evening. The next day, people came by to console me. Some patted my shoulder and said things like, "Kin, don't worry. You rebuild." Others shook their heads and told me stories about their own troubles, crops lost to floods, roofs blown off during storms, animals stolen by thieves. It felt comforting to know I wasn't alone in facing life's challenges, but it didn't solve my problem. I still had to figure out how to rebuild. One of my neighbors, Emeka, came by with an old hammer and a small saw. "Kin," he said, handing them to me, "use this until you get back on your feet." I thanked him, but deep down, I knew this wasn't enough. Even with borrowed tools, it would take months, maybe years, to rebuild everything I had lost. That evening, as the sun set, I sat with the village elders under the big mango tree. We shared kola nuts and listened to Elder Obi tell one of his many stories. He was a wise man, and people often went to him for advice. When the topic turned to my fire, he leaned forward and looked at me with kind but serious eyes. "Kin," he said, "what happened to you is a lesson about life. It's unpredictable. We can't always stop bad things from happening, but we can prepare for them." I frowned. Prepare? How could I have prepared for a fire? I didn't know it would happen. He nodded slowly. That's exactly why you need to prepare. Trouble doesn't knock on your door and ask for permission. It just comes. His words stayed with me that night as I lay on my mat, staring at the ceiling. What did he mean by prepare? How could anyone prepare for something as unexpected as a fire? I thought about the other struggles people had shared with me, crops lost, animals stolen, roofs blown away. Everyone seemed to have their own story of loss. Was there really a way to be ready for things like that? The next day, I tried to focus on rebuilding. I borrowed tools from anyone who was willing to help and started repairing what I could. My hands worked, but my mind kept going back to Elder Obi's words. It wasn't just the fire that scared me, it was the thought that something worse could happen. What if my house burned next? What if I got sick and couldn't walk? The fear of losing everything again hung over me like a dark cloud. One evening, while I was still repairing the remains of my workshop, Emeka came by again. He sat down on a wooden stool and watched me work for a while. Then he said, "Kin, you know, I used to think the same way you do. that there is no way to prepare for life's troubles. But I've learned something that might help you. I put down my hammer and looked at him. What is it? He hesitated, as if trying to find the right words. It's something called a safety net. It's not a physical thing you can hold, but it's just as important as your tools. It's a way to protect yourself so that when trouble comes, you're not completely helpless. I frowned. A safety net. What does that mean? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pointed to the small fence around my garden. Why do you think people build fences around their farms? I thought for a moment. To keep animals out. He nodded. Exactly. The fence doesn't stop every animal, but it reduces the chances of losing your crops. A safety net works the same way. It doesn't stop bad things from happening, but it helps you recover when they do. That evening, as I cleaned up my tools, I thought about what Emeka and Elder Obi had said. Life is unpredictable. Trouble doesn't announce itself. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way to be ready for it. I didn't fully understand what they meant yet, but I was starting to see that there might be a way to protect myself from the storms of life. And that was the first time I heard about something that would soon change the way I thought about preparing for the future. After that conversation with Emeka, I couldn't stop thinking about the idea of a safety net. I didn't fully understand what it was or how to build one, but I knew I needed something. The thought of another disaster, another fire, flood, or sickness scared me. I couldn't go through that kind of loss again. One morning, I decided to visit Emeka. He was the kind of person who always had advice to give, and this time, I was ready to listen. As I walked into his compound, I saw him sitting under a guava tree, sharpening a machete. Emeka, I called out, you spoke about a safety net the other day. I want to know more. How do I build one? He smiled and gestured for me to sit on a bench. Kin, building a safety net is not about wood or nails. It's about preparing yourself for things you can't control. Have you heard of insurance? I shook my head. Insurance? What's that? He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. It's like this. Imagine you have a farm, and you know that sometimes the rain doesn't come, or pests eat your crops. If you could pay someone a little money each season, and they promise to help you replace your crops if they are destroyed, wouldn't that make sense? I thought about it. So, they help you after something bad happens. Yes, Emeka said. That's the idea. Insurance is like a promise. You give a small amount of money regularly, and in return, they help you when trouble comes. It's not just for farms, it can be for your workshop, your house, even your health. The idea sounded interesting, but also strange. But what if nothing bad happens? Isn't it a waste of money? Emeka laughed. That's what I used to think too. But let me ask you this, why do you keep a roof over your house? What if it never rains? Is the roof a waste? I smiled. No, the roof is there just in case. Exactly, he said. Insurance is the same. It's there just in case. And when trouble comes, you'll be glad you have it. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. My fire had taught me that life was unpredictable. I didn't know when the next storm would come, but I knew I didn't want to face it empty-handed. The next week, Emeka introduced me to a man named Mr. Obi, who worked for an insurance company in town. Mr. Obi was kind and patient as he explained how insurance worked. He told me about different types, fire insurance for my workshop, health insurance for medical emergencies, and even life insurance to protect my family if something happened to me. At first, it felt overwhelming. There were so many options, and I didn't know what to choose. But Mr. Obi helped me understand what was most important for my situation. I decided to start with fire insurance for my workshop. It felt like the right place to begin after what had happened. When I signed the papers and paid my first premium, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was nervous. What if I was wasting money? But another part of me felt a sense of relief. For the first time since the fire, I felt like I was taking control of my future. Over the next few months, life began to settle down. With the help of my neighbors and the borrowed tools, I started rebuilding my workshop. It was smaller than before, but it was enough to get back to work. I also started saving a little money each week to buy new tools. One day, as I was finishing a chair for a customer, a young boy ran into my workshop, shouting, "King! King! There's smoke near your house." My heart stopped. Not again, I thought. I dropped everything and ran. When I got there, I saw that the smoke was coming from my neighbor's kitchen. A pot had boiled over, and the fire was already under control. But for those few moments, the fear of losing everything had come rushing back. That evening, as I sat in my workshop, I realized something important. I couldn't stop bad things from happening, but I could prepare for them. And that preparation gave me peace of mind. Months later, I shared my experience with others in the village. I told them about the fire, the help I received, and the lesson I learned about being prepared. Some of them were skeptical about insurance, just like I had been. But I explained it the best way I could. Insurance, I told them, is like building a fence around your farm or keeping a roof over your house. It's not about stopping the rain or chasing away every thief, it's about being ready for whatever comes. Looking back, I realized that the fire wasn't just a disaster. It was a lesson, a hard, painful lesson, but one that changed the way I saw the world. Life will always be full of risks, but with the right preparation, we can face those risks without fear. And that, my friends, is how I learned about the power of insurance.